Hello, everybody. We have signs of life. Per Michael Russo, Kirill Kaprizov, and Joel Eriksson are back to practicing with the Minnesota Wild. And though no definitive timetable has been established for their return, it is expected that they will be back in time for the playoffs. Both players will also be joining the team for their upcoming 3-game road trip, but neither will suit up for any action, according to head coach John Hines. This gives Kaprizov a chance to rendezvous with his New York based doctor, who performed his surgery back in January, and get a better timetable for what his rehab situation looks like. This also comes with the news that forwards Devon Shore and Brendan Gaunce were placed on waivers on Sunday. If they clear, as Russo points out, they can remain on the roster and be sent down later with no issue once Ek and Kaprizov return to the lineup. This move signals that the front office feels that Ek and Cap are probably closer to returning than not, but what does that mean for the playoffs? Let's dive into how this roster could look entering the postseason, including looking at a couple of young prospects who could be joining the team, and how the team could fare against their likely playoff opponents. So let's jump into the lines for the Minnesota Wild. With Eriksson, Ek, and Kaprizov both returning, this is how I think those lines will end up shaking up come the postseason. Especially looking at the top six, I think Rossi will stick as the first-line center between Kaprizov and Zuccarello, and Eriksson Ek will slot in between Johansson and Boldy there on the second line. If we look at Money Puck's line combinations for the Wild this season, those two lines are both some of their top combos in terms of expected goals per 60 minutes, and both of them have been played multiple times this season with success. As tempting as it may be to run the Boldy Eriksson Kaprizov line that sits atop that expected goals per 60 to try and drive some scoring, especially early on in the postseason, that leaves a second unit of Johansson, Rossi, and Zuccarello, which if we look through Money Puck is just not a line combo that this team ever runs. I think this mainly boils down to Johansson and Zuccarello playing very similar styles of hockey, where they're both a little bit undersized, they're both speedy, they're both pass-first wingers whose role is to carry the puck into the zone and then pass it off to someone who's a little bit more skilled at finishing. And so if you split them off from their typical wing partners, I think a line of Johansson, Rossi, and Zuccarello would struggle to score in a big way. And so I don't see that ending up happening here in this top six. As for the bottom six, this is a little bit more speculative on my part. I think Vinny Hinostroza has been a fantastic player up and down the lineup for the Wild, and has notched himself 7 points in the past 20 games as a waiver wire pickup, which is pretty solid. He is buddies with Ryan Hartman, and I really can't see Gustav Nyquist playing any lower than that third line. I just don't think he plays with the style that this team looks for their fourth line players. And so that's why I think that bottom six will kind of fall the way that I have it shown here. As for defense, I think they'll go into the postseason relatively unchanged from where they're at right now. So to start off with, we should see Middleton paired with Faber, followed by Brodin paired with Spurgeon, and Merrill slotted in next to Bogosian. This grouping will be complemented by another great waiver wire pickup from last season in Declan Chisholm, who I think would end up probably slotting into either of those top pairings if there's an injury, and expected signee Zeev Buium, the Minnesota Wild's 12th overall pick in the 2024 NHL Draft. Buium is expected to finish out the NCAA season here with Denver, where they have advanced to the Final Four on the back of Zeev's 48 points in 40 games season. However, as Russo points out for The Athletic, the absolute earliest we could see Buium would be if Denver falls to Western Michigan on April 10th, meaning that he could join the team on April 11th. However, Minnesota will be out west on a small road trip during that span, so the earliest he would likely suit up would be when they return for their April 15th season finale against the Anaheim Ducks at home. As such, I think it's probably unlikely that they would jumble their D pairings going into the postseason for Buium being able to join the season with one game remaining and then going into the postseason. In goal, I don't think there's too much of a question as to who is going to be the frontline starter. Philip Gustafsson has clearly won that role. In 51 games that he's played in this year, he has posted a 2.51 goals against average and a 916 save percentage. This is well above the league average according to Hockey Reference, which has that sitting at a 2.81 goals against and a 900 save percentage. Gustafsson has been incredibly solid this entire year and is a huge part of why we are even discussing playoff lineups, given how injured the roster around him has been. I think he has shown that he can take the brunt of whatever team gets thrown his way, both of which we will cover momentarily. But first, speaking of Buium as a late addition to this team, let's talk about if there are any other possibilities that could join the roster. Hint, hint, it's really no one. As Russo mentions, the Wild are right up against the cap ceiling, making their signing of Buium likely the last move that they can afford before the end of the regular season. And as such, any additions that are not coming out of Iowa are probably very unlikely. If we start overseas, I would probably concur with Russo that there's very little to no chance that we see standout forward Danila Yurov come over, even if Metallurg gets eliminated from the KHL playoffs. Firstly, they don't have the money to fit him in on the roster this year because of those Parise and Suter buyouts. Second, it's just not feasible that even if his season ends here, Metallurg would agree to let him come over from Russia. As Frank Saravalli notes, KHL contract end dates have been extended through May 31st, meaning that even if Yurov and Metallurg have their season ended after their next game, they still hold his rights until the end of May, and any chance of him coming over would hinge on their decision to let him. A somewhat similar situation came about last year with the team getting Marat Kuznetsov to come over, but in that case, Minnesota had to convince his KHL club Sochi to terminate his contract after the end of their regular season, which allowed him to join the Wild for the 16 games to end that year. The only other possible signee that may have joined the team would have been Charlie Stramel, Minnesota's 2023 first-round pick, who's coming off of a resurgent year at Michigan State. However, it appears that he will be staying at school for his senior year, which I do agree is probably his best path for his development, as I don't think he's quite ready for the NHL, and I don't think the best opportunity to get him started would be throwing him into the playoffs. Given that the Wild are destined for a wild card spot, it seems that they will be facing one of the Vegas Golden Knights or the Winnipeg Jets in the first round. Given that they currently hold the top spot, let's start by looking at Vegas. If healthy, this team is formidable. They have one of the better D-cores in the NHL, have a tried and true goaltender in Adin Hill, and have plenty of scoring depth up and down their lineup. Put bluntly, this is a team that has won before and is looking to do so again. Though, of their two possible opponents, this is probably the option I would prefer for Minnesota. Hill this year has posted a 2.46 goals against average and a 908 save percentage across 45 games, which is roughly on par with his play last year, but sits well below where he was at 2 years ago when they went on their cup run. In fact, his numbers from that season, a 2.5 goals against average and a 915 save percentage, closely mirror Gustafsson's numbers for Minnesota this season, though Gustafsson did it in roughly twice as many games. This test will be if Gustafsson can make the same jump Hill made in the playoffs, where Hill jumped to a 2.17 goals against and a 932 save percentage. I think if the Wild can stay healthy and quickly get back into rhythm with their returnees to their lines, I can see this being a very competitive and winnable series that could go either way. If the Wild get passed by the White Hot Blues and slide into the second wildcard spot, their chances become much more dire. They will be matched up against Central Division rival Winnipeg Jets, currently the President Trophy favorites, and one of the best rounded teams in the NHL. Elite playmakers like Josh Morrissey, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Nikolai Ehlers core A lineup with talent everywhere. The crown jewel of this team, however, and why I think they pose the biggest roadblock to the Wild, is in net. Connor Hellebuck has been a monster in goal this season, posting a 2.03 goals against average and a 925 save percentage across 57 games. A genuine candidate for the Vezina as well as the Hart Trophy, Hellebuck could easily stonewall the Wild even if they do get back into form, despite his drops in performance the past two off seasons. Unless they play at the top of their game every moment of every game, this is a team that could make the Wild pay for even the smallest of mistakes. I don't see much of a route for the Wild to go through the Jets unless Hellebuck massively falls off, and think that they could get sent home packing in fewer games than one would hope. But what are your thoughts on the impending playoffs? I personally don't have too much in terms of expectations. I think the Wild peaked very early on this season and played well above where I was expecting them to, and are kind of riding that high into the postseason. And on top of that, I think they have very difficult matchups regarding kind of who they could end up playing. However, let me know your thoughts down below and have a great day.